Today on this James the Bike Guy, we are taking a look at what is just a absolutely incredible new frame set from Specialized. This is the brand new Specialized S-Works Aethos Frame set. So in this video, we're going to talk a bit about the design and some of the neat features about this bike. We're also going to get it on a scale and see if the 585 gram claimed weight is correct. So if this kind of thing's interesting to you, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, as well as leave some comments down in the comment section below with your thoughts as we go over the bike. But so the first thing we're going to talk about with the bike is really going to be the ethos of the Aethos. So excuse the joke there, but this bike is designed around riding. That seems a little funny to say because, well, every road bike is designed around riding, right? Well, Specialized claims that the Tarmac is really designed around the performance in racing. You know, they used to have the Tarmac, which was sort of the lighter weight bike, and then they had the Venge, which was the aerodynamic bike. And now the Venge and the Tarmac are melded together to have one bike to do it all for performance riding. Now, that bike added a little extra weight because aero tubes are not quite as efficient. You know, it's got integrated cable routing with the handlebar and all that kind of stuff that really makes that bike neat and awesome for racing. But for the standard rider who just wants a super high quality, you know, super neat road bike, those things don't necessarily add to the bike. The other thing is as disc brakes have been added to road bikes, the disc brake bikes have gotten heavier. And so Specialized has decided to go after making a super lightweight disc brake bike. So this bike has a claimed weight of 585 grams. That's in its lightest paint scheme. This is not that scheme, so I expect it to be a little bit heavier, but probably not too crazy. But what you end up with is going to be a bike that feels and rides incredibly lightweight. And that's going to add to the rider feel. You know, they might still claim that the Tarmac's going to be faster because it's aero, it's got those other pieces, but this is pretty neat. Now, just because it's not a race bike doesn't mean you don't get race geometry and race performance. This is going to have the same geometry as what you'd get in a Tarmac SL7. So this is still going to be performance-based. It's still going to be, you know, a bike that you're going to be able to put out lots of power. And another interesting thing about the comparison between this and a Tarmac is it's going to have a similar goal for stiffness and weight. So this, of course, is a lot lighter weight, so the stiffness is going to be a little less than what you get with a Tarmac. But what you're going to end up with is something that feels super snappy and riding really well. Now, one thing I learned from Specialized is that they say that 75% of the performance of a frame is made up in the choices of tubing. And that's going to be something to talk about here, is as we look at the bike, it appears to be pretty traditional, right? So this bike designed around just riding is not necessarily set up with crazy tube shapes, aero shapes, things like that. So it looks like a traditional aesthetic, but it actually has a few things that are pretty neat. Now, they went through 100,000 computer simulated different tubing shapes and designs, and they came out with 20 that they then tested and validated. And this is what they came out with. Now, a few things that are interesting about this bike with the tubing shape is going to be starting with the top tube. So the top tube here, if you take a look at it, is fairly interesting because it's larger in size in comparison to the down tube to what you'd get in most bikes. And the other thing is as we rotate it over, you'll see it doesn't taper that much. And what that means is the tube shape stays pretty solid throughout. And then as you look at the down tube is going to do a reverse of what you see on most traditional performance bikes. So it's fairly large right at the head tube, and then it narrows or tapers as you go down to the bottom bracket. So with that combined, you then get this blocky head tube. So this is sort of a one large pipe, it looks like, across for the head tube. It's still going to be tapered, so you have a tapered head tube to it. But that big thickness on the front end is going to keep this front end of the bike, handling well, pointing in the direction that you need. But then it's going to allow your threaded bottom bracket to have these nice petite chain stays and seat stays to get that snappy feel and just good power transfer. Now the tubing isn't just down to the shaping. So this is made out of their 12R carbon fiber. And they claim that at no spot on the frame is it going to be more than 2 millimeters of thickness. 2 millimeters is next to nothing. So on a Tarmac SL7, you'll have spots, say, at the junction of the seat tube here, bottom bracket, up by the head tube, where it could get 4 to 5 millimeters of thickness. And what that means is there's some lazy fibers in there because the aero tubing and getting all that to go together is not quite as efficient of a shape as what they've come up with on the Aethos, meaning they need to add additional layers of carbon to make it stiff. Now, just because this has 2 millimeter thick tubing doesn't mean that it's going to be fragile. They still have a 275 pound rider weight limit. And then when you feel things like the top tube or the down tube, these are still pretty strong. They say you can still sit on the top tube just like you would on a traditional bike. You know, I remember a few years ago when the lightest Trekkimanda came out, it had tubes that were still strong, but you could kind of squish on them and feel it deform, and that's just not something that's happening here. So going on from that, the cable routing is the next thing that I think is pretty unique on this bike. And in fact, you'll almost see no cable routing. And that's because on the S-Works level of this frame, it's electronic, wireless, or wired only. So when we look at the whole drive side of this bike, there's not going to be a spot where you see any cabling happen. When you flip around to the non-drive side of the bike, what you'll see is right up at the head tube, there's going to be one inlet for the hydraulic brake hose. And this is also where you'd run the Di2 wire should you be running this with Di2. So you're going to have one inlet at the head tube, and then down at the chainstay, you'll have an exit for the brake hose, and just below, you'll have an exit for the Di2 cable for the rear derailleur. Now they've made a very lightweight, very specific derailleur hanger. This is threaded to be able to run your through axle out back. And as you go up front to your derailleur hanger for the front derailleur, you'll notice there's no hole in the frame for the Di2 cable to come out. It in fact comes out right behind the hanger. It's actually mounted into the front derailleur hanger. And that's what's going to put together a pretty clean aesthetic to this bike. Now it is going to be set up flat mount disc brakes. You've got flat mount on the rear. It's going to have flat mount for the brake caliper. You've got front through axle and then hydraulic hose that runs internal through the front blade. Aside from that, this is also going to be 12R fact carbon layup with an integrated race right up at the crown and a nice slick look to it. So before we grab the weight, one more thing to check out on the frame is going to be what the inside looks like. Now, I'm not sure whether or not this is bladder or EPS molded, but what I want to do is take a little scope, slide it into the frame, and then we can get a look at just how clean the inside is. So we'll go ahead and slide the scope in, kind of arc it up, and let's see what we can see inside of here. So that tube is very, very clean. Now, as we slid in, we saw just a little bit. You see that white stuff that we're pulling out from? That looks like some bladder material. Some there as well. And so you can check down. That is absolutely super clean. So that's really cool. So that's, we're now looking at the down tube. We just looked at the top tube. Let's go ahead and jump into the seat tube. So now we're going down the seat tube. You can see this frame is pretty clean here as well, which is nice to see. Keep sliding through. You can see the riv nuts and the little spot for the front derailleur here. So that's pretty neat to see. And now we'll slide in through the bottom bracket and hook into one of the chain stays. We'll see if we can get into that. And what is really impressive, so you see that little piece of light right there? That is actually where the brake hose comes out. So my finger's closing it. There we go. and it is really impressive just how clean this is, because I do believe it's a bladder molded bike, and man, that is pretty impressive. Now, with the scope, I do believe that this frame must be bladder molded because we could see just a little bit of remnants of bladder, but overall, it must be said that it's extremely clean in here. A lot of times a bladder molded bike, which is how most of them are done, you'll have lots of remnants left over, but not on this bike. So now that we've taken a look and talked about some of the features and designs of this bike, let's go ahead and find out what it actually weighs. So we'll take the frame, drop it onto the scale here, and you'll see that the frame with paint in a 56 is coming in at 636 grams. And then the fork will go onto the scale as well, uncut of course, coming in at 316 grams. Well, thanks so much for joining me to check out this S-Works Aethos frame. You know, as you probably heard, I'm absolutely smitten with the idea of this incredibly lightweight frame set that's not necessarily designed for racing, but really just about riding. So go ahead and let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below. While you're at it, be sure to hit that thumbs up button, the like button, lets me know you enjoyed the video. And if this kind of thing was interesting to you and you want to see more like it, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. That way you can do just that, and we'll see you again soon.